Cock 45 here. You're looking at a Top-Break Smith & Wesson revolver made by Uberti, right? But this one is the Schofield. This is probably the most famous of the Smith & Wesson Top-Break number 3 revolvers. And we are glad to have a Schofield back at the compound. We appreciate Bud's Gun Shop sending it to us. It is, again, it's kind of a classic. It wasn't made in the highest numbers of all the number 3 or big bore Smith & Wesson Top-Breaks, but it probably is the best known, and it is a nice revolver. It is very much like all the others. We'll talk about the differences. Let's take a couple shots first. Let's go ahead and get that 2-liter out of the way. Oh, a pot too, full of heavy leaves. Did I hit it? Yeah, let's get that 2-liter. See if I can hit him. All right, nice. How about a plate? Boom. Click, I knew it. Did he fire 5? Yes, he did. Nice thing about this is, I'll dump those on the ground just to demonstrate. We'll see if we can find those. But that was the advantage, of course, in the Top-Break. And one of the reasons for the Schofield, with the latch that opened this way, with the latch on the frame, thanks to Major, I think, George Schofield was, and the cavalry, they wanted to be able to, if possible, break it open. Now, I'm going to do something that's kind of unsafe here. It's empty, you can see. But you could use your saddle or your leg or whatever, or just yank it open like that. But if it was a little tight, you could put it against your leg and, get all the rounds out of it, with one hand, while this hand was holding the reins. And that was one of the changes that he wanted to see in this gun after using the Model 3 that worked the other way. And you saw that on the new Model 3 that I had, where you pulled on this part. But on this one, the latch is on the frame instead of on the barrel. Okay, the Schofield. That is the biggest difference right there. Okay, a little difference in the grip contour, but that's the big difference. 45 Colt, Uberti, a beautiful thing. I mean, they just really are. It is a cool revolver, no doubt about it. I'll put links to the other videos that we have with the other Model 3s and everything. I go through a lot of the history. I'll do a little of that here, but we'll do it kind of briefly, not rehash everything. Okay. I've got a Colt out here, just again, the difference. We always assume we have new people or people who are just, getting into firearms and don't even realize the difference. These were the 2 major types of firearms. You go back into the 1860s, 70s, cartridge firearms with the Top-Break Smith & Wessons, and there were some others. And then, of course, the Colt single action, where you get the half cock and you loaded it through, the loading gate, And then when they're fired, then you ejected the empties with this ejector rod. You spin the cylinder and eject that one, eject them one at a time. I'm saying you get pretty quick at it, but that's the way you had to eject the empties, okay, on the Colt style. All right, so that's the reason I brought it out. We know we have lots of young people, and this could be the first Old West video you've ever seen, right, of a how-to nature. So this was Top-Break, and Smith & Wesson had been making Top-Breaks for a long time. I mean, they pretty much pioneered, in 1857. They came out with, I think, the Model 1 22 short, and it was a revolver much smaller than this, and it broke upward, and you had to take the cylinder off to load it. You put the cartridges in it, the 22 cartridges, and put the cylinder back on and closed it back down. And not as strong as breaking from the top like this, but for a 22, and then they later made it in 32, which a lot of Civil War soldiers carried, actually. But both of those broke upward, and you had to take the cylinder off to load them. But you still had 5 or 6 cartridges in there. Cartridges, it was still easier to load than a percussion revolver, right? So pretty handy. Then when they went to the big bore stuff, then in the late 60s, with this, 69, 70, with the Model 3s like this, they got the patents to have the latch up here, and a hinge and an extraction system. They got all the patents in order. They already had the rights to the Roland White patent for bore-through cylinders. That's why they were able to make those, you know, cartridge guns back in the 50s even. And so they owned the market, you know, basically for the cartridge firearms. All right, that's why they were ahead of Colt on that. See, so in 69, 70, they had these big bore, you know, revolvers like this, cartridge guns, because cartridges were out there. You know, the Henry that was patented in 1860 and was really available in 61, 62, the Henry lever gun, you know, used a cartridge. And in fact, I have one of those right here. That's an actual Henry rimfire there on the end. I'll get my pointer here. That's the Henry rimfire. And so that cartridge was around in 1860, 61. And so there you go. So, but again, we were using percussion revolvers for the most part. And give you a little quick history again, a little bit of a review of this. That was the first revolver, or the first, really successful cartridge, because you had the Henry that chambered it. It was, that one I think has a copper case even. Later they had it in brass, but that's a really old one. That's original. And so the very first of the big Smiths was chambered for that, the very first ones, okay? And then they went to, because the Army wanted a center fire. And so, because the Henry's a rimfire, so the Army wanted a center fire, so they went to this, and it was called the 44 American, particularly after the Russian rounds came around and all that, so they called it the American. It was, I think, originally called the 44-100 or something, but it's a heel-type bullet. You can see the bullet like a .22. It's flush with the side of the brass there, and so that's just a little bit different from modern cartridges, isn't it? And so was the Henry. So then they got, Smith got, for these big bore revolvers are pretty cool. You know, they'd use cartridges, so the Russians loved them. And they paid for a large contract in gold for these things, except they wanted a different cartridge, a little bit different. Of course, they wanted the centerfire, and they liked the 44, but they wanted this non-heel type bullet. They wanted a more conventional bullet like this one is, and our modern ones are. It fit down into the case, and the lube was, in grooves down in the case, unlike the heel type bullet, which is a .22 rimfire is a heel type bullet. Okay, now these here are 45 Schofield rounds, both of those. So that takes us up to 75 when this became chambered in 45 for the military, all right, in the Schofield model. You got one copper and then one brass, but those are both actual 45 Smith & Wesson rounds for the Schofield. You'll notice they're a little shorter, if I can find a 45 Colt round. Happen to have one handy. See, they're a little bit longer, and that's what the Colt 45, the single action Army was chambered in right there. So and Smith, the Army wanted this to be chambered in 45 Colt, and I believe Smith said, yeah, we'll do that. But they really, turns out they couldn't do it, and the cylinder was shorter, and they needed a shorter cartridge. Now, that was one thing that made a difference. Let's load it up again. And any of the modern reproductions like this are going to be generally, especially the Schofield, they're going to be in 45 Colt, because you can shoot the 45 Smith & Wesson in them, and a lot of people do, but it's more convenient if it's chambered in 45 Colt, because it's a popular round. All right, I'm going to load 5. Okay, and we will. Now, one reason I do that the way I do it, people have asked that. You could do that and close it up maybe, because the firing pin doesn't really protrude here. I've got it on half cock, and I think there's even a transfer bar in these newer ones, and you could probably bring that down and then cock and fire and everything, and you may see people that do that. Now, one reason I like to do it the other way is, I can also prevent that from coming out by pushing this little button down there. There we go. The Schofield has a weird cylinder. It'll turn both ways. It doesn't index like a Colt or any other revolver that you know about. It's like it's free-floating totally. It's kind of weird. And I always like to go ahead and close it up and then cock it, fire it, click it, and I know it's locked in there, okay? And so when I pull that thing back the next time, I know everything's going to be right. Okay, that's just me. I don't want to go into combat and not have my revolver ready to fire. Okay, so the sights seem to be pretty much on with this. Unfortunately, I shouldn't have told you that. So I don't have a lot of excuses for missing too much. There's a pot right there. Oh, I'm gonna hold right in the middle of the cowboy and see. Well, a little bit high there. I need to take a finer bead. Yeah, there we go. Windage looks pretty good, doesn't it? Let's try a 2 liter. Yeah. Did he fire 5 or did he fire 6? Either way, I'll test my flinch. All right. Oh, I know that's 5. It's got to be. Yes. Okay, we'll dump these out everywhere we can get to them. Right. And of course, that's a big advantage. Again, the being able to eject shells quickly and to reload it quickly. You know, I think there were even some primitive speed loaders that people had back then, and you could modify and make one today probably if you wanted to, load it quickly. But that's the thing that the Smiths had over the Colt in a lot of ways. And then there were people, both sheriffs, people on the good side of the law and on the bad side of the law. Jesse James supposedly carried one of these. There were lots of Buffalo Bill, you name it. Who else? Texas Jack, Omohundro, just different people that I think it's pretty much authenticated that they carried these at some point, and of course a lot of people might have carried one at some point. Think about yourself and the different firearms that you have carried or you have fired, and me too, depending on what decade you catch me, what I've got. All right, well, let's see if it's gong worthy. We'll just try it one hand. Saw that. I love that. Takes a while to get there. Nice, nice, nice. Oh boy. Let's try that turkey over there on the top row. See if I can take a fine enough bead on him. Okay, a little too fine. Oh, went just over him. Yeah, the windage feels pretty good. It really does. I had one of these a long time ago. I may have talked about before. And I just could not develop a lot of love for it for some reason, and traded it off for something. But I actually like these. And as you could tell from the other Top-Break videos we've done, they're just so interesting. They really are. And like I say, the Schofield was not the one that was made in the biggest numbers, really. It just gets all the press because I guess it was, adopted by the military. Well, so was the original 44 in some numbers. But it just Major Schofield and all that story about changing it and the adoption and it being in 45, just like the Colt Single Action Army. So it was the one that gained more fame, I suppose. Now, there were a couple of reasons, maybe more than a couple, but why it didn't become more popular in the West, and the reason you don't see as many of them in the Westerns, I guess, and that sort of course, in the Westerns, they're not necessarily authentic. They get whatever they can get, and okay, it's just like lever guns. It might be any lever gun. It might be a lever gun that was made in 1900, but they think it fits. So they're not necessarily authentic anyway. But the problem was these Schofield rounds are short, and they're a little bit shorter. It's kind of like a special 44 special versus 44 Magnum. So you got 45 Smith & Wesson versus 45 long Colt, longer case. Well, the Colt Single Action Army, this gun, those were out there by 73, of course. The military had them, the 7-inch barrel, model, 7.5-inch barrel. So those were there. And then Schofield was able to help talk the military into adopting these. They bought about 3,000 or 4,000 of these in 75, I believe, 1875. And so the military had these, and they bought more in 76, 77, and everything. And so you had the cavalry especially, and different people carrying these, and then some carrying these in the same outfits, more or less. But there's 2 different cartridges. Now, not a problem with this gun, because you could use either one in the 45 Colt. Okay, if it'll chamber the long one, it'll chamber the short one, correct? But with the Schofield, it had a short cylinder. Now see, this one's not indicative of that. This has the same length cylinder as that one. But the real Schofields, if you see a real one in a gun show, look up pictures, it'll be a little shorter. It will not chamber a 45 Colt. You know, it would be like that. You have to have the short cartridge. Well, you know what happened? They would get shipments of ammo and they wouldn't get the short ones, you know, or they'd be in the wrong box or something. And so anybody who had a Schofield, there's no ammo that will fit. Okay, you put one of these in a real Schofield 45 and it's going to probably look about like that, you know, and it's not going to close up. It's going to be all the way in, and so you essentially have no ammo. So after that happened a few times, you can pretty much imagine, okay, we have a problem, Houston. We need to get rid of these Smiths, you know, or not buy any more. And that's what they eventually did in 1880. They put them all out on the surplus market, you know, and you've probably seen some of the short ones. Wells Fargo bought a bunch of them, cut the barrels off, and you see the Wells Fargo models with the 5-inch barrels. And they were carried and used a lot by everybody. Anybody wanted to buy one, you know, and local police or whoever. So they were popular, but things like that are what kind of killed the Smith & Wesson Model 3s, I think. And plus, that huge Russian contract, that put a lot of focus on for Smith & Wesson to fill those contracts for the Russian models. And so meanwhile, Colt was taking the market. So that's part of the reason that the Colt single action seems to be, if you follow the media, the only firearm that was used in the West almost, you know. But these things were they were fairly popular and well liked. So let me pull the hammer around, drop it on an empty chamber. Okay. A couple more shots. I like this thing because the sights are pretty much right on. I'll try a pig over there. I don't know if I'll hit it or not, but if I work with it a little bit, I think I could learn to shoot it. A little bit high, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, I see that, a little low. There we go. Let's try the gong again. Yeah, sweet. And she's empty. All right. Pretty cool. What else about that? You can, to take the cylinder out, I won't do that, but you take the screw out and it lifts this up just a little bit. You can see there's a little ledge there that keeps the cylinder from sliding off. It holds it. If you take this screw out, then that hinges upward just a little bit, and you pull the cylinder out, and it makes it easier to clean and all that. Okay. Again, you got. I mean, people would argue this is not as strong as a Colt single action with the solid top strap, and it might not be, but it's pretty strong. Like I say, the flip-up model Smith made for the smaller calibers, they just you couldn't use that system with the bigger bore in the 44s and the 45s. So this really was a better gun. It's got a totally different grip feel. Again, I went through a lot of this earlier with the new Model 3, how the grips changed and what the Russians did. They wanted there's a little, if you see one with a little protrusion right here on the trigger guard, that's one of the Russian models. And then the new models have a little bit different contour here. Some people like that better, some don't. And again, the latch system's a little bit different, but by and large, the Model 3, this is basically the Model 3. There's not a lot of difference, you know, amongst any of them. Okay, the Model 3 indicates the big frame. It's kind of like our modern end frames, you know, big frame, and that's what the Model 3 was about. So, pretty cool. Ejects its cases, and again, remember, the Smith owned the patents on these cartridge guns, and that's why they had something like this out there long before Colt, you know, had this. So we're talking, you know, years ahead of the game, because the Rollin White patent had, you know, Smith owned the rights to it. And so Colt, they messed around with their conversion guns when they got that patent expired in '69, I believe. And they could do that, but they weren't ready to come out with this yet. And so they were a little bit behind on that. And probably good for Colt. It worked out well for Colt that Smith was so preoccupied with filling that huge Russian contract, and that the military had that problem with the ammo compatibility. You know, so that was something that worked out pretty well for Colt. But I like these. I have developed more of a fondness for them. I'm gonna shoot it one more time. Is that okay? I got time, guys? Okay, thanks. I've developed more fondness for these over the last few years for some reason. I don't know what it is. I used to not be as crazy about them. I was always crazy, but I wasn't as crazy about these. So let's put it in a holster here. Now again, I could load 6 here. I'm on the range. I'm going to load and shoot it, but I don't want to get in that bad habit. Let me go ahead and click it. Okay, now it's ready to go. Put it in the holster. This is a Schofield holster. All right, I'm going to, let's see. What should I do here? Let's just pull it. Oh, I better put my ears on. Sometimes when you fire a gun, it makes noise, I've noticed. Oh, I know what. Those propane tanks down there need to be shot. So I'm going to pull him out and put him on. Click. All right. It's a different feel, but I like it. I could get used to it. The sight, the windage, I think is on perfectly, as you can see on the Cowboy. And it's mostly a matter with this one, I can tell, of figuring out how much of the sight to hold up. It's got a nice visible sight on it, so that's not a problem. Seems to function fine. So got US on the stock. Pretty neat on the grip, the butt of the grip there. Pretty neat gun. Gosh, if you've not experienced one of these, try to get somewhere and shoot one, because if you like the firearms of the Old West, you know, this is one of the key firearms, these big old Model 3 Smiths. You know, I like the modern Smiths, big frames, you know, the Model 29s and all those. And this is, in a way, this is like the great granddaddy of those. A little more awkward, it's single action only in these models, but with the history and everything, it's just pretty cool. So, Schofield. Oh, by the way, this is, if you've seen the movie 310 to Yuma, now I can't remember the guy's name, the beady-eyed bad guy, carries 2 of these. Those are Schofields. And of course, that's Hollywood. You know, he's hitting everything he shoots at. But those are the Schofields. Big old, sexy looking guns, really. And that's why they choose guns like that for some of the movies. You know, just a cool firearm. Well, anyway, I know you got to run, and I've got to shoot a few more 1,000 rounds tonight, but we're not going to do it on camera. Life is good.